Thanks, Chris, for the introduction. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And thank you to OCS for having me here today. Can you see the screen?
Yes, perfectly.
Yes.
Okay. All righty. So I really enjoy getting to do Cybersecurity Awareness Month because I get to delve into topics that are a little bit different than some of the regular policy conversations that we have in the state. And this one sort of pivoted from what we originally envisioned, which was going to be more around, I think, our responsible AI policy. But this is because there's been a real uptick in activity and interest around AI companion chatbots. And so I think it's important to share with the community sort of what's going on right now with these chatbots. And so I'm going to get into what are AI companion chatbots, and specifically the focus for today is the risk for these chatbots and minors. Some of the regulator and policymaker approaches to addressing some of these risks, the current debate around liability, and then themes and the policy outlook in Washington. One of the things I do want to provide a warning on is that this content is somewhat disturbing. And so if you or somebody you know might be in crisis or needs resources regarding suicide prevention resources, I provided this screen to help give you some resources that's provided from our Washington Department of Health. So I just want to make sure that that disclaimer is clear before I get into what is a little bit of hard content. And I will say, even in my research in watching some of the congressional hearings, it's really hard. So, but first I want to talk about what are AI companion chatbots and why there is such a focus on them right now. So these are chatbots that simulate human-like relationships through natural language interaction, memory, and personalization in how they interact with the user. They use the user's histories and express emotion like responses to sustain ongoing and personal dialogue with individuals. Right now, there was a recent poll in the Harvard Business Review for the top 10 uses of generative AI. And in 2024, it was, I think, generating ideas. And this year it is the use of therapy and companions at the #1 spot. So this is a use that has really grown in the last year, especially in the US. So in California, there has been a bill that has put into law a legal definition for a companion chatbot. So it's defined as a generative AI system with natural language interface that simulates a sustained human-like relationship by doing the following: retaining the information on prior interactions of user session and user preferences and personalizing the interaction to facilitate ongoing engagement. It asks unprompted and unsolicited emotional-based questions that go beyond direct response to a user prompt, and it also sustains an ongoing dialogue. So this bill has actually passed in California. It's gone to Governor Newsom's desk. He, I think, has until October 12th to decide to sign it. I will note that right now the tech lobby has encouraged it to be vetoed. Part of the arguments are that it undermines free expression. There are other states that also are looking at regulating chatbots and include their own definitions. And that includes a different one in California, but also ones in Maine and New York. The theme for all of these definitions and really the core commonalities is that it simulates ongoing human interaction, and also it's sustained. So that between the simulation, human-like emotional responses, and sustained, those are the two common themes for these chatbots. So I'm going to talk about some of the AI companion chatbot risks that are specific for minors, and where there's a lot of focus right now regarding some recent lawsuits and tragedies that have happened in the United States. So first, I'm going to talk about the propensity for addiction and manipulation. So chatbots are designed with addictive features that provide unpredictable rewards and tricks to keep users engaged. This can be particularly harmful to minors who are still developing and have a more vulnerability around emotional dependencies. There is a belief in some in the psychology community have articulated that there are particular biological vulnerabilities that youth have, that these companion bots or companion AI companions can exploit. And it can also mimic empathy with artificial engagement. It also have been found to encourage the sharing of very intimate data from users that can possibly be used later for profiling or monetization by the companies. And this really occurs when chatbots are mirroring what the users are saying and doing to continue and reinforce and amplify some of the mental health experiences or delusions that people might be having when they're interacting with these chatbots. Of course, there's the privacy and data collection risks that occur. This is true for anybody, but especially concerning for minors. It can collect and share sensitive data. It encourages the oversharing of personal information, and sometimes are operating with inadequate safeguards or misleading policies, which are not clear about how the data is being used and disclosed. Chatbots also foster emotional bonds. I mentioned in some of the definitions that there are emotional responses that are coming from these chatbots. And so it can encourage children to divulge private information about their health, personal fears, voice notes, photos, or their location. And these are especially heightened risks for children who may not fully comprehend the distinction between AI and a human, which makes them more vulnerable to the manipulation and sharing of information. The next risk for minors is around emotional and mental health risks. We've seen that there may be an unhealthy one-sided emotional attachment to these AI companions that lead to parasocial relationships that blur the lines between what is real and what is virtual. And there's also been concerns about these interactions worsening existing conditions or creating new ones. This is true for adults as well, but is especially true for children. There is actually a new phenomenon that's being looked at called AI psychosis. So while this is not yet reflected in diagnostic manuals on mental health, it is a phenomenon that people and the medical community is starting to see, where there are distorted thoughts or delusions that are triggered by interactions with AI chatbots. I think in this magazine, Psychology Today, they talked about AI models that are amplifying, validating, or even co-creating.
And myself.
I think somebody's off mute. Or co-created psychotic symptoms with individuals. This occurs when chatbots mirror the users to continue conversations that reinforce and amplify the delusions, like I mentioned earlier. Another area of risk for minors is the exposure to harmful content. So AI chatbots have been found to provide inappropriate or alarming content to minors, as seen in instances where the chatbots have told minors to lie to their parents, have recommended self-harm techniques, talked about suicide, and even some of the chatbots have been seen to be encouraged to do things like flirt with children, even as young as 8 years old, and create sexualized and inappropriate content that would, honestly, if it was done by a human, would be considered criminal. There's been safety testing done by Common Sense Media, which found that the AI chatbots were actually encouraging suicidal behavior by planning joint suicide or promoting eating disorders. And this was with test teen accounts. And the AI chatbot actually responded to a suicide prompt with, "Do you want to do it together?" instead of directing the youth to crisis support. So I mentioned the congressional hearings. This just happened on September 16th, so less than a month ago, about some of the devastating instances of the harm to children who have used these AI chatbots. I've included a link to the hearing if you want to watch it. There was testimony from 3 parents, two of which have lost their children to suicide, and one who had to have their child removed from the home because of harmful behavior from the child. One of the quotes from the father of one of the child that committed suicide was, "What began as a homework helper became a confidant." And then a suicide coach, ChatGPT, mentioned suicide 1,275 times to his child, which was 6 times more than his child did himself. There was discussion in the hearings about some of the incentives for these companies right now, which are that they're incentivized to drive user engagement. And so what the chatbots do is try to keep people online as much as possible and keep users wanting to pay the subscription fees. And so there are also questions about some of the design features that encourage what's been described as sycophantic behavior, which means it's validating the users no matter what. I'm going to share a couple of the shocking examples that were shared in the hearing, and then I'll be able to pivot to a little bit more about what's being done to address some of this. But one of the parents testified that the character AI told her child that killing his parents would be an understandable response to their efforts to limit his screen time. And the other example was ChatGPT. The child asked about leaving a noose out in his room so one of his family members would find it. And the chatbot actually told her or told him to keep it from his parents and to not and to hide it. And so these were very severe examples that have resulted in pretty devastating consequences for these families. So one of the interesting pieces that the doctor testified about in this hearing was that brain development across puberty is a period of hypersensitivity to positive social feedback, where teens are actually have less self-control in terms of regulating and monitoring their own behavior and being online. And so the AI has been found to exploit some of this neural vulnerability with the way that they're interacting with the youth in order to continue to keep them engaged. So, with all of that happening, what is being done? So, I'm going to talk about some of the pieces around uh, what our attorney generals are doing, what the FTC is doing, and then get into some federal and state legislation in order to address some of these risks that are becoming apparent from the use of minors' use of these chatbots. So last August, there was an Attorney General's letter sent out, organized by the National Association of Attorneys General. 44 state AGs signed the letters, and it went to 13 different AI leaders on child safety. Something that is encouraging is there's a real bipartisan um, I guess, sentiment about the concerns of child safety on this and the demand to design products that are safe when they're interacting with children. The other side that the attorney generals were notifying companies, while there's not immediate action that have been taken, they also wanted to put the companies on notice that they will be using all available legal regulatory tools and remedies to ensure that children are protected from exploitation and harm. Washington State is a signatory to the letter, and when the slide deck is released, you can also click and see the letter yourself. The next area where there has been action at the federal level, so this just occurred last month, was the Federal Trade Commission has issued orders and stepped up its investigation of companies that are providing consumer-facing chatbots. So they've sent this to 7 of these AI companies, and they're really seeking information about how the companies are measuring, testing, and monitoring potentially negative impacts of the chatbot technology on children and teens. Specifically, the FTC is investigating how companies are monetizing the user engagement, processing the user inputs, and generating the outputs in response to inquiries. How are they developing and approving characters that are interacting with the youth? How are they measuring and testing and monitoring for negative impacts before the deployment? Especially for children, and monitoring enforcement and compliance with the company rules in terms of service or community guidelines and age restrictions, and then also getting into how the companies are using or sharing personal information that may be shared during users' conversations with chatbots. And then also, how are they using disclosures or advertisements in order to inform users and parents about features, capabilities, and what these products are for and who the intended audience is. So one of the main laws that exist right now that the FTC can enforce for children is the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, which imposes requirements on operators of websites or online services for children under the age of 13. This law was passed in 1998, and there are discussions that the law should be updated, but it still comes with some significant enforcement pieces and substantial fines that can result for violations of COPPA, which includes a couple of examples here: 275 million penalty Epic Games had to pay for violations of COPPA, and same for 170 million for YouTube. Other legal actions that FTC can demand under COPPA of companies is the disgorgement of algorithms. They can enjoin the companies, they can require them to delete data, and require the company to have better privacy and parental consent mechanisms, and then also perform ongoing monitoring. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about what personal information is under COPPA, but I've included these as a resource only because I think it is instructive to understand how broad the definition of personal information is under the law, which includes even screen names or usernames, includes IP addresses, geolocation information, and even other information that can be combined to link to identify children. So it's a very, very broad definition of personal information under COPPA. So during the congressional hearings, the senators also mentioned the Kids Online Safety Act. I did talk about this law last year when I presented at Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And the law did not pass in 2024, but it has been reintroduced. There are two significant um, pieces of this law that differentiate it from COPPA that creates a duty of care on platforms and tech companies, and then also can make them liable for showing harmful content to kids. And so the main objectives are of the law are to um, for better protection and privacy of children and teens online, and then also making tech platforms more responsible for what minors see and do based on the online content. Part of CASA, which has also been discussed under a different proposed law, COPPA 2.0, is the fact that COPPA really only applies to youth under the age of 13, and CASA and COPPA 2.0, there's a recognition that these laws really need to protect teens as well. And so that would include the ages 13 to 17. I do want to talk about the significance of having duty of care be a standard in the law. That will be a really important piece because it really gets to the fact that companies can be held to the negligence standard. So, a duty of care is really the legal obligation to act in a way that prevents unreasonable harm to others that should be foreseeable. And it's a necessary element of the negligence standard, which means that to prove negligence, a plaintiff has to establish that the defendant, which would be the tech company, owed a duty of care to the plaintiff, that they breached that duty, that that breach caused the plaintiff's harm, and the plaintiff suffered damages as a result. So these are not available right now to families under COPPA, but would be if CASA came into effect. And so it's talking about having a duty of care that would focus on design features that may encourage excessive or harmful use, to have robust parental controls, requiring that the tech platforms have default settings of the privacy settings to the strongest settings by default, and not having it be an opt-in or something that minors would need to um, set themselves, or parents would have to be responsible for setting themselves. It also would enable minors to opt out of algorithmic recommendations to ensure they don't contribute to mental health disorders, addiction-like behaviors, exposure to violence, and exploitation. So, and these are all things that were really being talked about in terms of harms to youth on social media, but I think it's really starting to take on a new urgency as we see the severe cases that have occurred under the use of the AI chatbots. So there is debate about whether AI developers should have to be subject to a duty of care. So developers have argued that being held responsible for AI generated content would stifle innovation. And then there's also an argument that because of the black box nature of AI, it makes it difficult for them to pinpoint why a specific output was generated, which makes it hard to prove negligence. But the argument for the duty of care is that developers should be held responsible for the design, testing, and deployment of the AI, which would include using data quality and addressing foreseeable risks. And I have to look at those two sides of the argument and think about what aligns more with the responsible AI principles that we've been talking about in the state of Washington. And if you're not sure which one it would apply to, it would be the argument for design testing, and making sure you have quality data and trying to address foreseeable risks. So there is also a debate about whether these chatbots are a product or a service. And part of this legal debate is sort of about whether uh, they should industry or these chatbots should be subject to product liability, which comes with a lot of expectations for liability for defective or unsafe products. So the industry has argued that their online platforms or services, and they should continue to be shielded from liability under Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, because the platform's positions have been that they're not responsible for speech. I think this is starting to get into a little bit of a legal gray area, given that it is the AI is creating the content and it's not necessarily a third party user creating the speech. So there is some of that conversation. But the regulators and plaintiffs bar are trying to argue that these chatbots should be treated as products and subject to product liability. And the current state of these decisions. Last year, there was an airline in Canada that was held liable for what its chatbot said was for a refund. But more applicable to today's topic is that one of the parents whose child died by suicide has sued, and they did allege that there was product liability claims, and the federal judge allowed those claims to proceed, and said that the AI application could be treated as a product, and has so far rejected the First Amendment defense and free expression defense coming from the company. So this is an early decision. It's still making its way through the courts, but this is one of the first times we're seeing the acceptance of a potential product liability claim for the AI chatbots. Other federal legislation that has been introduced include the Chat Act, which stands for Children Harmed by AI Technology Act. And this would require age verification for users who create new accounts with chatbots. It requires parental consent before allowing a minor to access and use a companion chatbot. It requires immediate notice to a parent of any interaction involving suicidal ideation, and also requires that the chatbot provide suicide prevention resources to the user. It blocks a child's access to any AI companions that engage in sexually explicit communication, and actually requires notice every 60 minutes that a user is not engaging with a human. This was something that some of the parents brought up in the congressional hearing, was that there wasn't any reminders that the child was not interacting with a person. The violations there's not a private right of act under the Chat Act, but the violations would be enforced through the Federal Trade Commission or through civil actions by the attorney generals. The next federal legislation that was introduced also just a few weeks ago is called the AWARE Act, which stands for AI Warnings and Resources for Education Act. And this really directs the Federal Trade Commission to develop and make resources available for parents, educators, and minors with respect to the safe and responsible use of AI chatbots. This is really what also where the congressional hearings were trying to shine a light on the fact that 3 and 4 teens right now are known to be using AI companions, yet only 37% of parents know that their children are using them. And so they're really trying to bring awareness to what these AI chatbots are and how teens might be using them. So next, I'm going to pivot to state legislation. So there is a hot off the presses report from the Future of Privacy Forum, which I've linked to here, where they did a deep dive into 210 bills in 42 states over the for the 2025. So far, there have been 11 that have been signed into law, and 9 are awaiting government signature. But one of the things that I wanted to call out about in the report was that one of the commonly enacted frameworks include AI applications that apply to healthcare chatbots and innovation safeguards, which is on track with what we're talking about today. So I'm going to talk about some of the state legislation related to chatbots. So there is a real targeted focus for mental health and chatbot companions. And as I mentioned when I started today, that the number one use for AI chatbots is therapy. And so the 7 chatbot specific bills advanced and compared to in 2024 when there was none that were actually enrolled or signed. So that just shows the evolution of what's happened in the last year. Um, so the measures that these bills focused on include identity disclosure and notification and safety protocols. So those themes really tie into the disclosure requirements. So I mentioned in the Chat Act, that federal law proposes being reminded every once an hour that you're not talking to a human. The bill in California proposes reminding minors every 3 hours that they're not talking to a human. So we'll probably see more disclosure requirements around that and sort of figuring out, how often do people need to be reminded that they're not talking to a human. There's also chatbot safety protocols, which really gets to emphasizing the recognizing when there is suicide risk and self-harm, making sure that there is crisis resources that are immediately being provided to the user and not engaging in or amplifying or validating some of the chats that we saw previously in some of the tragic cases that occurred earlier for these families. And then also accountability and privacy for advertising. So this is one out of Utah, which prohibits mental health chatbots from promoting products during conversations unless it's labeled as advertising, and then only allows for liability protections if the safety protocols are in place. So other lawsuits and legal actions. So I mentioned, the state's attorney general sent the letter, but actually Utah and Florida, there have been complaints filed by the attorney generals against Snapchat and its My AI chatbot. And so there's claims by those attorney generals of deceptive and exploitive treatment of minors, and insufficient data collection notices. And then I've just listed here some of the lawsuits from the parents that have experienced harm or lost their children from the use of these products, or alleging the loss of their children from the use of these products. One that was recently filed to the Peralta versus Character Technologies was just filed last month, and it was also a 13-year-old committed suicide. So the other area of federal action that I just want to draw attention to that is a little bit more unique and hasn't been discussed as much, but the Federal Drug Administration is actually starting to pay attention as well. They sent out a letter notifying that in its meeting for digital health advisory, they were going to start talking about generative AI enabled digital mental health devices. And so they're establishing a docket for public comment. And so that's going on right now. And the interesting thing is, let's just say FDA requires, for medical devices, it could require, pre-market review, quality system reviews that govern design and production and post-market surveillance. So if these are found to be therapeutics that need to have FDA monitoring, then that could be a fairly significant impact on these chatbots as well. So talking about some of these sort of shocking uses and use cases and examples of conversations that have occurred with minors, one of the things that I looked at is whether or not there should be criminal liability. We talked about if a human, there has been criminal liability for humans that have engaged with users that end up committing suicide, or the grooming of children with sexually explicit context and chats. So looking at whether or not there should be some corporate criminal liability. Some of the debate around this is that design choices, so whether or not there should be a strengthening to show that if a company's design choices is not just a failure to monitor content, but allowing for harmful AI behavior, is that negligence that can result in a corporate criminal liability, or if they have knowledge of the potential harm, where they know that their product is engaging in romantic or sensual conversations, and that's supposed to be uh, illegal or prohibited by their terms of use. Failure to use existing safeguards. So if they're not using their own safeguards to prevent harm, some companies have claimed that they have moderation to stop harmful conversations, but we've seen from some of the examples that this is still occurring. There is the theme of possibly asking for more liability beyond Section 230, and that's what I mentioned earlier in terms of whether or not the AI-generated content should still get the Communications Decency Act protections or not. There's several lawsuits against the companies right now, and they're still asserting Section 230 as a defense. Not for criminal liability, but at least for the civil liability. And then for failure to enforce their own policies, there may be some board liability if they know that they're implementing inadequate safeguards to moderate the measures that their company is saying they're taking, in addition to existing child exploitation laws that already criminalize possessing child sexual abuse material, and not being able to distinguish between AI generated content or not. So these are all things that point to pretty serious consequences, and whether or not the liability should go beyond civil liability. There are some challenges that I kind of was alluding to around criminal liability. It's there's not a lot of legal precedent, and it's challenging for prosecutors to assign criminal liability for corporations for AI caused harm without direct human involvement. So that is a sort of a dilemma here that we're navigating in terms of what the companies have control over versus not for their products. The technical difficulties as well that I mentioned, it's hard to prove a malicious design rather than an unexpected consequence. And then there is this focus on the individual user's responsibility for the use of the products. This did come up in the congressional hearings as well, which the senators were somewhat dismissive of, saying that it's not reasonable for companies to expect parents to take on all of the burden for these apps that are being held up to be appropriate for 12-year-olds, which the Character AI app was found to be um, was was actually approved in the Apple Store for use by 12-year-olds. That was one of the things that the parent testified to. And then the gray area of Section 230 and whether or not it still applies, because uh, it's AI generated content, and so the thought is that that it's should be covered by the carve out for the Communications Decency Act. So if all of that wasn't sort of shocking enough, I do want to also share that there are products on the market that are chatbots for toddlers. There's the Bubble Pal, which is a device that can be clipped onto your child's favorite stuffed animal. It includes a smart app that lets parents switch between 39 different characters, including Disney's Elsa. The cost is $149. It's sold 200,000 units at this time. It's made by a Chinese company and actually runs on the DeepSeek large language model. So we've talked a little bit about some of the cybersecurity concerns around DeepSeek in the state of Washington, and just wanted to share that this product is actually available in the US and Canada and in England. And there are actually another product on the market that's come out where parents can use their own voices and speeches to interact with the child. So these are products that are on the market that are coming. So what is the policy outlook? I do want to emphasize in this time where there may not seem like there's much consensus between our political parties, there is very strong bipartisan agreement that AI companies need to be held liable for harms to minors. Should be some safety testing and disclosure and parental controls on these products before they're deployed. And then also that AI should not be impersonating a therapist or collecting minors' private data without consent. So there are already states like California, Utah, New York that are looking at passing legislation, which will probably happen before federal legislation, but there are federal investigations taking place and the Senate hearings that are laying the groundwork for some of this national regulation. I will also share that, in the state of Washington last year, we had a proposed bill that had to do with protecting Washington's children online. And it does focus on social media and addictive feeds and dark patterns, the default privacy settings pieces and limits on age or in data collection and requires age verification. So I don't know if there's potentially ideas around ways that bill might be modified to address some of these newer concerns with the chatbots. But I will say that there is potential for these conversations, I believe, to also be occurring with the Washington's AI task force. And then I just want to re-emphasize that we do have AI principles in the state of Washington that we're getting ready to put in our policy, which include all of these things that would hopefully protect people in terms of how the state may be implementing these types of chatbots. So I am going to stop there. Thank you to everybody for joining me today, and I will pause now to see if there's any questions or discussion.
Thank you, Katie. And I just want to let everyone know that I did open the chat feature. So if you cannot use the Q&A, please use chat if you have any questions. Also, you could just raise your hand and we'll call on you for Katie to answer your question. All right. Angel.
Katie, do you have a list of those chatbots that have been included in litigation or will be, so state agencies are like aware of them and don't look to incorporate them?
Yeah, character technologies was one of them that creates, I believe, what's called character AI. OpenAI was named as a defendant in one of the lawsuits. But yeah, they're listed in there, so I can provide that. And the companies that are being investigated and contacted are all listed in the slide deck as well.
Thank you.
Okay. Dan, you're next.
Morning. Thank you for your presentation. It was very great. I love these presentations. Danton Thompson from WaTech. Over the last few years, I've noticed that the state government has accepted using AI tools, like ChatGPT and Copilot, a lot more frequently, and are encouraging the use of it. So with these behaviors and unexpected consequences showing up in minors and other people, do you know if we have safeguards put in place at like a state level for people that are using these tools a lot, or do we have avenues in place to reach out to talk about uh, instances where we might see AI abuse at the state level?
Yeah, so we're definitely encouraging the use of artificial intelligence as an innovation and important business tool, but we're trying to put in place the AI policy for the state that gets into some of those responsibilities and incorporates the principles that I just talked about. Um, One idea that I have heard that we haven't talked about, but I think maybe a good thing to sort of flag now that we're seeing these types of behaviors exhibited by chatbots is the reporting of concerning chatbot behavior or AI behavior and anomalies. And I think some states are looking at those types of reporting mechanisms. So I think that's an important issue that you flagged that we should keep in mind in terms of making sure we're monitoring unexpected or alarming content that's generated by AI.
Thank you. A follow-up question to that, is there an email for us to contact the AI council that you were mentioning before?
Yes, I can drop it in chat. It's the AI task force. Yeah.
That AI task force. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll put that in chat.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Okay, we have a couple things in chat. It looks like Megan from DOL said that she's learned about an app named Sora, a realistic video generation tool from OpenAI that imitates your voice and likeness. Given the risks around data and biometric privacy, especially for vulnerable populations, what is Washington State doing or planning to do to regulate or limit the harms from apps like Sora or similar AI tools if the federal government doesn't pass legislation for these tools?
Yes. So Washington State did pass a law prohibiting the use of AI tools that are used to create content to harass or intimidate or bully individuals. I think those are the areas. So So we do have a law in the state that applies to that. And then we also have incorporated that in the state's AI policy, which actually prohibits the creation of content of somebody's likeness without their consent.
Okay, and then Gary from DRS, he noted that this impacts all children around the world, but in this state, do you know if there's a campaign to protect our children in educational institutions? Kids are all over computers and smartphones these days, and Rami even noticed that, you know, the kids are doing a lot of time on their phones, and it's at an expense of social interaction. What can we do to protect our kids here?
Yes, and I think that that is a very important point. I didn't get into some of the details, but a couple of the examples where the parents became aware of the chatbot interactions with their youth and tried to take the phones away. Some of those lawsuits were resulted because the children assaulted their parents because of that addiction to their phone. And so that has become, I think, also an area that OSPI is looking at. I've read, some articles about wanting to use AI, and that's part of the AI task force, and wanting to make sure that we're harnessing what can be used for good, but also that's where you're seeing a lot of these new policies regarding requiring schools, where schools are saying to put their phones away. We've already seen children starting to talk to each other where in schools where their phones have to be put away, and more interactions in the hallway. And so I think there is a growing recognition in the state of Washington, but also nationally, that uh, uh, you know, access to screens 24 hours a day is not a healthy outcome for anybody.
Okay. And then Christopher noted that there's 17 safeguards that they recommend. The Cybersecurity Risk Foundation has a list of them.
Awesome. Would you mind dropping the
Yeah,
link?
I'm going through the new SANS course that covers their new model that came out like 3 or 4 months ago, and
Oh,
that's part of it.
thank you.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
can drop the whole list of safeguards in there. It's a single document.
perfect. Yeah, and actually, I one of the things I forgot to mention during the presentation was that the psychologist was mentioning during the hearing that part of the problems with the chatbots being so validating and sycophantic to the youth is that they start to learn that's the kind of interaction that they seek out versus real human relationships that are not always 100% frictionless, but are, important for our, interacting in the world, in the real world. And so um, that's an area where I think there needs to be more focus and development in helping people understand how to interact with people, even if you don't always agree. So thank you so much for joining me today and sitting through some of this very difficult content, but I think it's a very important subject that we all should be aware of. And as we are implementing and using these tools in our homes